There is one thing Carl Jung once warned about, and it is also the narcissist's greatest nightmare. They will never see the moment coming when the empath awakens and breaks the chains in silence. No screaming, no tears. Just a quiet disappearance, powerful enough to shake the false world they built. Because when someone who once endured, once forgave, once loved with their entire soul, suddenly chooses to return to themselves, the narcissist has nowhere left to hide. The mirror that once reflected their illusions shatters. And in those fragments, for the first time, they are forced to face the terrifying emptiness within. This is not just a story about a toxic relationship, it is a journey of awakening, a place where silence becomes a weapon and choosing yourself becomes a declaration. So make sure you watch until the end of this video. And if this is the message you've been needing, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss content that helps you rise, heal, and step into true freedom. You see, a narcissist can endure your tears. They even feed off your anger because every time you shout, you are still revolving around them. But what they are never prepared to face is the moment you walk away in silence. Because when you are silent, when you no longer need explanations, no longer need apologies, no longer hope for change their power collapses, they lose the only fuel they've ever lived on, your reactions. And in that moment, they finally realize you were never as weak as they believed. You were never their puppet to be pulled by strings. You are a soul capable of love, of forgiveness, but also of choosing yourself. This sends them into panic. They try to reach out. They bring up old memories. They knock on your door with every trick they know, from sweet words to blame. But you know the truth now. These are just old cards in a game you no longer play. What terrifies the narcissist is not losing you, it is losing control over you. They do not miss you, they miss the feeling of controlling your emotions. They do not grieve the love, they grieve the power. But when you stop reacting, when your heart no longer trembles at their performances, when your eyes no longer search for their approval, all the curtains fall. And for the first time, they are forced to face the raw truth. They have nothing left but an empty ego. And this is your awakening. You begin to see true love is not sacrifice to the point of losing yourself. True compassion is not enabling cruelty. True forgiveness does not mean granting someone the right to wound you again. The moment you rise, not for revenge, but to choose peace for yourself, is the moment you send the most powerful message: I no longer belong to this game. The silence of the empath is not an empty void. It is a declaration, a firm statement that says, I will no longer live inside a play where I was never the main character. In a toxic relationship, the empath is often caught in the cycle of sacrifice. They confuse kindness with obligation. They excuse cruelty by calling it hidden pain. And little by little, they lose themselves, their needs, their boundaries, even their inner voice. But the human soul has limits. One day, the empath reaches that limit. And when silence appears, it is not surrender, it is awakening. They begin to see clearly. Love never requires one person to disappear so the other can exist. And so, they return to themselves. They gather back the pieces they once gave away unconditionally. They enter the journey of facing their own shadow, the fear of abandonment, the fear of not being enough, the fear of being unworthy. But instead of running, they begin to listen. They learn to say no. They learn to set boundaries. They learn to love themselves before loving anyone else. This shocks the narcissist, because in their eyes, the empath was only ever a mirror reflecting them. When that mirror falls, they have nowhere left to hide from their own emptiness. And in that moment, they panic. They try to pull, to manipulate, to reopen old wounds. But this time, everything is different. The empath no longer reacts the same way. They no longer cry, no longer argue, no longer wait. Instead, they choose calm. They choose silence. And that silence becomes the loudest storm inside the narcissist's soul. Empaths by nature, listeners, givers, forgivers, do not easily walk away from a relationship. They endure. They wait. They hope that if they love long enough, deeply enough, the other person will change. But that is the greatest mistake. Sacrificing yourself to preserve an illusion. The narcissist knows this. They survive on your reactions. Every tear you shed, every time you blame yourself, every moment you tremble at their silence, it is all fuel feeding their hollow ego. For them, love was never about connection. Love was always about power. And that power only lasts as long as you keep revolving around them. And then, one day, you awaken. Not because you suddenly became cold, but because your soul has reached its limit. When silence arrives, it no longer feels like the punishment they once imposed on you. It becomes the gift you give yourself. In that silence, you begin to hear the voice of your own heart. You realize that love is not a one-sided battle, not an excuse for pain, not the fear of being abandoned. True love must begin with loving yourself. When you step out of that cycle, the narcissist is stunned, because they never believed you could exist without them. They thought you would always remain waiting, clinging, begging. But now, you no longer react, you no longer chase, and it is that absence that robs them of control. Remember this, the narcissist never misses you for love. They miss you for power. They do not regret losing you for connection. They regret losing the stage that upheld their ego. And when that power is gone, they spiral into chaos. Meanwhile, you begin to rediscover yourself. You see the truth of what has happened. You recognize that all this time, you traded your peace just to hold on to a relationship that was never real. You lived in a play where your role was only to reflect. But now, you no longer want to play that part. You gather back each piece of yourself, your self-respect, your dreams, your faith. You begin to do small yet meaningful things. Taking time for yourself, setting boundaries, saying no without guilt. Each small step is a quiet revolution. This throws the narcissist into even greater panic. They try to return not with arrogance this time, but with weakness. They speak of pain, of loss, of regret. They no longer come as the controller, but as the victim. And you, the one with a compassionate heart, may waver. But then you realize, if regret only appears when their power is gone, it is not real. It is just another tactic to pull you back. Through this journey, you learn a priceless lesson. Forgiveness does not mean allowing the cycle to repeat. You can forgive to free your heart, but you do not need to reopen the door that once wounded you. And so, you move forward. Not in anger, not in hatred, but in peace. You understand you don't need revenge to prove your strength. Your silence, your freedom, and your self-respect are the clearest proof of your power. When the narcissist sees that you no longer react, no longer collapse because of them, no longer place them at the center of your world, they fall into their deepest fear. Because for the first time, they must face the truth. They have no power left. And that power, you reclaimed it, not through rage, but through awakening. From here, you begin a new journey, the journey of finding yourself again. You learn how to love without losing yourself, how to give without self-destruction, how to stand alone without feeling lonely. And you realize true freedom is never something given by another. It is something you choose for yourself. An empath, once awakened, is no longer a fragile being to be controlled. They become a lighthouse, not to save every ship, but to light the way for themselves and for those ready to see the light. Your silence is no longer fear, but strength. It is not an empty void, but a space to breathe, to listen, to be reborn. And in that rebirth, you discover you never lost your worth, you only needed to return to see it. A narcissist can endure your anger. They can withstand your accusations, even relish the moments when you lose control. Because when you are angry, you are still revolving around them. When you cry, when you argue, when you try to prove yourself, it all confirms that they are still at the center of your world. But there is one thing they are never prepared to face: the moment you go silent. When you no longer need apologies, when you no longer wait for change, when your eyes no longer seek their approval, that is the moment all their power turns to ashes. Empaths are born with vast hearts. They love deeply, forgive endlessly, and always believe that with enough patience, love can heal every wound. But they were mistaken. Love cannot save someone who does not want to be saved. Blind sacrifice never becomes a miracle. In toxic relationships, empaths often lose themselves. They excuse cruelty as unhealed wounds. They confuse disrespect with hidden pain. They convince themselves to wait a little longer, to love a little more. But day after day, month after month, they wither, until one day the soul can bear no more. The empath reaches their limit, and when that happens, they no longer scream, they no longer argue. They simply walk away in silence. And that retreat is not weakness, it is rebirth. Do you know why that terrifies the narcissist? Because for the first time, they realize you no longer need them. The elaborate game they built, a game of control, manipulation, and power, loses its audience. And when the curtain falls, all they are left with is their own emptiness. While they spiral, desperate to pull you back, you step into a different path, a path you never imagined you would walk, the journey of finding yourself again. You realize that silence is no longer a sentence they impose on you, but a gift you give to your own soul. In that space, you begin to hear again the inner voice that had long been forgotten. You remember the dreams, passions, and values that once made you shine before they were buried under the shadows of a toxic relationship. You begin to set boundaries. You learn how to say no without guilt. You stop carrying the emotional burdens of others. And every step you take, no matter how small, becomes a quiet revolution. This drives the narcissist into greater panic. They return, not with arrogance, but with weakness. They play the victim, speaking of pain, of regret, of broken dreams. They knock on your heart with tears. But then you realize, if their remorse only appears when they've lost their power, it is not real remorse, it is just another trick. This time you no longer fall for it. You have learned that forgiveness does not mean allowing the cycle to repeat. You can forgive to free your heart from the weight of resentment, but you do not need to give another chance to someone who never truly valued you. And when you do this, you begin to understand the true meaning of strength. Strength is not about revenge. It is not about proving who was right or wrong. It lies in the ability to rise, to walk away, and to choose peace for yourself. The narcissist may call you cold, unfeeling, but you know the truth. You are not unfeeling. You have only learned how to love without self-destruction. You have learned how to give without losing yourself. And you have learned that your peace matters more than anyone else's demands. The moment you choose yourself, you send the most powerful message of all. I am no longer playing this game. I have found my own path. That is the moment the narcissist realizes they have truly lost you. Not because you walked away, but because you awakened. And for them, nothing is more terrifying than an empath who has stepped out of the cycle resolute, strong, and free. An empath reborn is no longer a fragile being to be controlled. They become a lighthouse. Their light is not to save every ship, but to illuminate their own path. And from that light, others too may find the inspiration to leave the darkness. Your silence is no longer escape, it is power. It is a voice that needs no words. It is proof that you have taken your life back. The narcissists once believed themselves invincible. They thought that as long as they held control, you would revolve around them forever. But they never understood that the human heart has limits. An empath may endure in silence for a long time, but that silence is not weakness. It is the signal of an approaching eruption. Not an explosion outward, but an inner explosion, awakening. Throughout the relationship, the empath often forgets themselves. They pour every effort into soothing, healing, convincing themselves, if I am just a little more patient, if I love a little more, then everything will change. But the harsh truth is, the narcissist does not want to change. They are not looking for love, they are seeking possession. Think about it. How many times did you forgive? How many times did you excuse their indifference by calling it their hidden pain? How many times did you sacrifice your dreams, your peace, just to keep the relationship from collapsing. And in the end, you were the one who endured loneliness, even while standing right next to them. That is the tragedy of the empath. They love so much that they forget they too deserve to be loved. But then an inevitable moment arrives. The moment when sacrifice is no longer noble, but becomes betrayal of the self. And when that moment comes, the empath no longer cries, no longer shouts, no longer argues. They simply turn away. The narcissist never anticipates this. They are used to seeing you react. They are used to you demanding answers, begging for attention, or pleading for them to return. That was the fuel for their ego. But when you no longer react, when you walk away in silence, they lose the only thing that sustained their illusion of power. And that is when their real fear begins. They panic. They cannot bear your absence, not because they love you, but because they cannot bear losing the one who once made them feel powerful. They begin trying to reach out, to manipulate, to drag you back. One day, they appear with false sweetness. I miss you. You're the only one who understands me. Another day, they show anger, accusing you. You're so cold, you've changed. But these are just different cards from the same deck. This time, you are different. You no longer seek explanations. You no longer shed tears over promises that were never kept. You no longer place them at the center of your world. For the first time in years, you put yourself at the center. And you discover a profound truth. You never needed them to be whole. You only ever needed yourself. When you realize this, you begin to reclaim the broken pieces of who you are. You remember the dreams you left behind, the values buried deep. You listen to the inner voice you once ignored. You learn to set boundaries. You learn to say no without guilt. You learn to love in ways that never require you to lose yourself. Of course, this journey is not easy. There will be moments of guilt. There will be times when memories return and you wonder, was I too cruel? But then you will remember, memories belong to the past. And the past is never a reason to accept being hurt again. What frightens the narcissist most is not that you leave, it's that you no longer belong to them. They can no longer manipulate you with anger. They can no longer control you with silence. They can no longer hold you with empty promises. You have seen through it all. And once the truth is revealed, the game is over. The empath is no longer a victim. They have become reborn. Their silence is not escape, it is strength. Their absence is not emptiness, it is proof that they have reclaimed ownership of their life. From here, the empath begins a new journey. They no longer love to be accepted. They no longer give in order to be needed. They love because they choose to. They give because they are whole. And that is true love, not built on blind sacrifice, but on mutual respect. The narcissist will go on searching for new supply, new mirrors to reflect their illusions. But they will never forget you, not because they still love you, but because you became their greatest failure. You proved that their power only ever existed because you allowed it. And when you withdrew that permission, all their illusions collapsed. Meanwhile, you continue your journey not to prove anything to them, but to live fully for yourself. You learn to embrace silence, to treasure each moment, and to know that happiness is not found in someone else's approval, but in the way you affirm yourself. And one day, you look back and realize, what once brought you pain became the very lesson that led you to freedom. You no longer carry hatred, no longer hold resentment. Instead, you feel gratitude for everything that shaped you into a stronger, wiser version of yourself. You see, when the empath goes silent, it is not failure. It is the beginning of a new chapter. They no longer live to please others, no longer sacrifice themselves to keep an illusion alive. Instead, they learn to rise, to walk away, and to rewrite their own story. The narcissist may try to return with tears, with promises, with performances of regret. But the difference now is you have changed. You no longer see with the same eyes. You have learned the difference between real love and manipulation. And once you've seen the truth, you can never return to the illusion again. This is what terrifies the narcissist most. Not because they lost you, but because they lost the only power they ever held. They cannot control a soul that has awakened. They cannot manipulate a heart that has learned to love itself. The empath is no longer fragile, no longer easy to exploit. They have become someone who knows how to set boundaries, how to honor their own worth, how to love without losing themselves. Their silence is no longer fear. It is the loudest voice of all, a voice that does not need to scream, does not need to argue, yet is powerful enough to shatter every false mask. And this is the final message. You do not need revenge. You do not need to prove yourself. You only need to live fully in your truth. Because once you have chosen yourself, you have already won. Not victory over the narcissist, but victory over the doubt, fear, and weakness that once held you captive. When an empath chooses silence and walks away, it is not an escape, it is a quiet revolution. They don't need to shout, they don't need to argue, they don't need to prove anything to anyone. It is that very act of leaving in silence that becomes the loudest voice, declaring that they have seen their own worth, that they have awakened, that they no longer belong to the endless cycle of pain. What the narcissist will never understand is this: true strength is not found in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. And when the empath returns to their true essence, they become living proof of a deeper truth. No one can define your value except you. You don't need revenge to prove you've won. You don't need an apology to know you are worthy. Your greatest victory is when you no longer allow yourself to be pulled into their illusionary game. You choose peace. You choose freedom. And most of all, you choose yourself. From that moment, your life turns a new page. You no longer love to fill a void, you love to share. You no longer give to be accepted, you give because you are already whole. You no longer live to be seen, you live because you truly see yourself. The narcissist may continue searching for new mirrors to reflect their illusions, but they will never forget you, because your silence left a void that no one else can fill. They don't grieve you out of love. They grieve because they lost their power, and that is the clearest proof that you have won. The empath, in the end, is not merely a survivor, they are reborn. They step out of the darkness not with a heart full of hate, but with a soul that is clear, proud, and free. And the message they leave for the world is simple. I once lost myself in blind love, but now I choose to love myself first. And that is the most eternal love of all. If you're watching this video and see yourself in this story, remember, you are not alone. Your journey may be full of challenges, but it is also full of opportunities for rebirth. Walk forward with the belief that you deserve peace, respect, and true love. ATDH. If today's message has touched your heart, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next videos where we continue to explore, to heal, and to build a life of freedom and strength every day. And leave a comment below. I choose myself as a promise to yourself that from today forward, you will never again let your light be dimmed. You are worthy, you are whole, and you are ready to step into the next chapter of your life.